the military is the greatest structure in existence. No, I'm just I'm just fucking with you. Actually, I don't like the military, but I think it is one of the largest examples of strict structure and fundamentals being a sort of concrete in order to surround, or rather the rebar that is surrounded by concrete, right? And the fact, if you guys don't know, actually, the history of concrete and rebar is that rebar reinforces concrete. I want to say like 200 or 300%. It makes it stronger. And then, of course, now they're coming out with technology to where they use graphene and concrete to make it way fucking stronger to where you don't even have to use rebar. But that's a side tangent. Anyways, so the military is pretty crazy, in fact, in terms of how they handle structure and how they handle fundamentals, because that's probably the biggest thing that they do in terms of the military, right? So, like, I have a friend who is a platoon sergeant, and he has also been, I think it's called like a range master. I don't know. I'm pretty sure all you know, Army guys will correct me, but he was in charge of a range as well too, even though he is technically not a range master, but he did it anyways. And you could see this type of regiment, this type of structure that happens within the military that is almost unparalleled in any other type of industry within the entire world. You could even see this as far as how basic training happens within, you know, the Army, for instance, and the fact that they break you down in order to build you up. And the reason for that is because, well, they want you at the same origin point so that they know how to teach you in a very structured way, right? So you aren't coming from a completely different mindset or whatnot. Instead, you're coming from the same mindset so that they can then train you based upon that mindset of, you know, basic training that you had went through. So LCS has no way of systematically getting everyone on the same level, because you have first you have everyone that is coming from a different perspective when it comes to roles, right? So you have, you know, a jungler is coming from a different perspective, a support is coming from a different perspective, an ADC, you know, etc. And so you have all these different perspectives that happen within solo queue, and then you're supposed to meld them all together. That sounds incredibly difficult to do. And so what happens then is that you have tailor-made education. So that is to say that you necessarily teach an ADC a specific way of, you know, maybe how they've been taught about the game. Now you have to teach them through their lens, right? Because that's the only way, or rather, that's the only, I guess, foresight that they've ever had in terms of how to look at the game. And with that, it draws a different must from the teacher themselves, the coach themselves, is the fact that they then have to explain the game in this particular way, but they have to do it 5 times in 5 different ways. And I don't know if you guys have any dealings with the American education system, but it's bad. And it's also, I don't fault teachers fully, but it's bad in the sense that there are only so many different ways that you can teach a person. And if you have to teach a specific thing 5 different ways, right? Because there's 5 different roles, that stretches you out. Because if all these players aren't in a relation to each other and they have no fundamentals of how to relate to each other or their roles, then it becomes more of a strain on the education system in order to actually educate the players. And so there lies, I think, the fundamental problem in the fact that the coaching staff and, you know, the entire organization isn't able to tweak the model into a way into which they can get everyone on the same page as far as thinking about the game in a particular way, but instead they approach it of doing tailor-made education in 5 different ways, which is way more difficult to manage as far as, a coach is concerned, right? So I think on, as one of these side notes, I guess, of just, sure, you need to have structure, but you also need to have fundamentals down. And I think rules of the game are not discussed a lot in League of Legends. And this is content creators, this is analysts at, Riot or whatever on the broadcast. This is coaches even, I would assume, right? I don't have full knowledge of what they're talking about, but it certainly looks like they don't have rules for the game. And the fact that I think rules for the game would benefit people and benefit teams and players. You set hardline rules and you say, okay, this is what we're going to follow about 90% of the time. One easy thing you could do is say, Drake, at 1:30, everyone needs to decide whether they need to recall or not. And if you decide not to recall, we're going to be doing this Drake, and you have to come and you have to help set up vision and you have to help set up for the objective. So if you have a big item buy, get it done before then, because we're not waiting for you, right? So get all of that done. Make sure that the jungler is aware. Jungler probably has to be ahead of that play, like 2:30, right? Before, so that he can help reset lanes, he can help tidy things up, and then you can kind of go for the Drake fight, right? And this is considering, also too, if you want to fight for that Drake. It's like, okay, 1:30 is our timer. That's when we need to be on time for that Drake to get vision set up, get priority, get wave set up, etc. So like that should be a fundamental rule for the game. It's the same thing with Rift Herald. It's like there should be a recall, right? A 1 minute recall announcement of just like, okay, bot lane, are you going to recall for Rift Herald? And are you going to transfer over to top lane? Is your wave set up for us to do a recall, etc.? Like things like this. These are rules about the game that is it's a current fundamental about the game. And I don't think a lot of LCS teams understand this particular aspect, right? I'd call out other regions, but I don't really watch other regions. So this is a really big problem, but I think even more so is when a player doesn't know how to ask when they're doing something wrong. I think that's probably the most particularly egregious thing within, I guess the player environment or within esports. So there's this idea of when you're at an employer and you're just like, okay, how do I move up in the company? How do I get a raise? That's a question actually that all of you should be thinking about. How do I get a raise? How do I end up talking to someone and figuring out what exactly I need to do in order to make more money, right? Because, we're all looking for more money, right? So there's this great book. Actually, I haven't even read the book, but I've just heard the man speak. And it's entitled Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And so this guy is he's an FBI negotiator, right? So he goes on to criminal scenes where someone is trying to shoot somebody or they have them held hostage, etc. And he talks them down and he's just like, okay, like what the fuck do you want? Tell us what you want first, right? Like you got to be clear with your terms. And then, let's get down to the nitty gritty of exactly how we accomplish this thing. So as such, there is a great, I guess, line within his speech that he talks about how to get a raise within, your current job. And first, you need to show that you have investment within the company. So that's to say, I really care about this company. I really am passionate about what I'm doing. But, I need goals. I need a direction. I need something that I can bite on, But also, I need something to where I can say, hey, I've accomplished this. You told me to do this. I've accomplished this. You've told me to do this. And I've used this actually in my real life, in fact. After I watched a couple of that guy's speeches, I ended up going to my boss and asking for a raise. And I reiterated some of the similar points into which what Chris Voss was talking about. How do I make sure that you feel like your raise is justified in terms of what you're spending on me? How do I make, me work for the money that you're willing to invest in me? And once you say that to your boss, like, they're just like, oh, fuck, like, this guy really is invested. And not only that, but, he wants actionable items, and he wants to know exactly what he needs to do in order to earn his keep. It's fantastic. I would be ecstatic if I was a boss and I had heard someone say that, right? Which is why I fucking said it. So, and on top of that, I think there is a sort of disconnect within esports, and I keep hearing this over and over again because players, coaching staff, etc., they end up being surprised when they get fired or they get benched or etc. And I think it's because escalation comes so sudden. So there's a great little bit, I think I've said this before in another video, but Kevin Hart, the famous comedian, has a great bit about like having an argument with your girlfriend. And he ends up explaining, like he was cheating on his girlfriend or something, right? And this like hypothetical shit. But, you're cheating on your girlfriend. And then in an argument, and you're all heated and you're all bickering. And you could just throw out the line, well, every time I come in the house, you got the goddamn microwave on high. And it's like what? Like, where did that come from? Why would you talk about the microwave? The grander point of that is that don't blow up. Don't just blow up by the small instance of what someone had done, which annoys you, to then blow it up to the grander thing of what you actually hate about what that person does. Refer to previous instances of errors instead of shoving it at them, all at once in one single instance, because then that person gets very confused because maybe they just didn't know that they were annoying you in all these other instances, So that seems to have happened in a lot of esports teams, and that's on the fault of the management of just like, you need to kind of document all the instances into which annoy the fuck out of you, and maybe a player is playing incorrectly or you notice these tendencies. Document that and say, hey, you've done this here, here, and here. Like, this is a problem and I need you to fix this, right? And just lay it out flat so that they know exactly what they need to fix, right? Approach them again after you have told them that, okay, I talked to you like 2 weeks ago about this problem. Looks like it hasn't been fixed. And here are the recent instances in which it hasn't been fixed. You're going to be benched. I think there's ample evidence that you haven't been up to par as far as improving that thing. But I hope with this and with maybe a little bit less pressure in terms of being in the main team and whatnot, and maybe also giving you a more fresh perspective, you're able to actually tackle this problem. And we'll still be documenting how you are trying to tackle this problem. And once you do, you are more than welcome to earn the spot back, in fact. Because that's the biggest problem that I see in you. And I think that's the biggest problem with all these esports organizations and, the LCS teams, is that they aren't willing to dole out responsibility and accountability to certain players and how they want them to play the game, or rather even, coaching staff and how they want actionable things of what they want the coaching staff to accomplish. You have to be able to put your ideas and your theories into words of how you want someone to improve, or how you want someone to fundamentally lead your team or to play the game itself. You have to be able to express those things, because if you can't, then that person doesn't know what they need to do. So, at the fundamental crux of everything, the reason why there is a need of an explanation. So I don't know if you guys have heard of how people need to understand the why of why they do something, because there has to be a broader meaning of why you do something, because then it is just constricted to that particular thing, and maybe that thing isn't that meaningful. And because I said so is not a sufficient response as to a why question. Why do this? Why do that? Because I said so. That's like a person talking to, a 4-year-old or something, right? Like, sure, kind of works then, but really you should be able to give someone a why that makes sense to them, on their level. You tell a kid why, well, it's like you got to break it down onto their level, and then maybe they can understand it in the broad scheme of things. And Nietzsche has a great line that I think is probably his most famous line, which is, "He who has a why to live for can bear any how." And I think that is about 90% of the way in terms of thinking about the reason as to why the why is so important, is because the why kind of extends your broader meaning of what is your life or what it is that you're trying to accomplish. But I think also too, and I think he didn't cover this in detail, at least, I haven't read a lot of Nietzsche, but why is the shortcut to helping someone apply that same method to other things, right? Because when you have someone that explains a why very acutely, that means that they've explained it very well. You understand the concept of the why. You understand, okay, I'm doing this because of this, because it's important, or I'm setting up vision for the Drake early on because it's going to be important when we're trying to get positioning over near the Drake, and to where we can kind of pick any angle, and also maybe too we can catch someone out because they think we don't spot them, etc. Right? So like the why is very important for people to understand, because then when you give someone their why, then you're able to have them apply it to different instances that are quite similar or even more abstract. And when you do that, that's when you actually empower people. It's not the same if you're trying to educate someone to where you educate them based on memorization. And like, that's one of the fucked up things about our school system is the fact that people are taught through enforcing memorization of just, okay, if this, then do this. But there is no, other if statement then, and that is the big problem of educating someone, I guess, on the basis level, is that you need to give them multiple if statements, but the better way to do it instead is to just give the why of why are you doing this. Explain the grand idea of why someone is doing that. So then they can apply the logic, and then also if something doesn't quite match, they can then question you and say, hey, you said this, but this particular circumstance is a little bit different. Like, can you explain maybe if your certain fundamentals apply to this? And then you can kind of expand on that, and you can say, well, actually, yes, it does. And, here's why. So I think the limit and the scope of the fundamentals within League of Legends, and especially within the LCS, it ends up preventing players and teams from figuring out their why, but also just having the, I guess, idea that everyone needs to have their tailor-made customization of education, which then doesn't allow them to be on the same page. And I just think that's a really big problem within the LCS scene. And I think that's one of the core flaws of all the LCS teams, in fact.